What is community asset mapping and how does it show up in my practice? To me, community asset mapping is participatory, where folks are encouraged to create a living, active document mapping out our community strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, what most people call a SWOT analysis. But I don't mean a literal document, but more like a scan of what the issues are that our communities are confronting, our assets, and the resources that we already have access to. The goals and the mission are also really important from the onset to articulate. What are we trying to accomplish, and how will we engage folks who are directly impacted by these issues? I think this step is so vital, even with Chinatown Art Brigade's Housing for the People mapping project, and the Here to Stay augmented reality project, and even projections that we did. We spent a lot of time meeting with community members, activists, tenant members, and other stakeholders who are directly impacted by housing injustice, possible eviction, and landlord harassment. And more specifically, we work with the Chinatown Tenants Union, CTU, of CAV, Organizing Asian Communities. We work with them to map out the places of significance. Folks not only identified the small businesses, community centers, or theaters, or restaurants that had been displaced, the small mom and pop places that are now overwhelmingly replaced by commercial galleries, but they also highlighted places where the Asian community rose up and fought back against displacement. So places like 81 Bowery, where there were tenants who were facing eviction, and they actually were able to organize a tenant union and eventually fought back against this eviction order. Or a place like Jing Fong Restaurant, where workers have been fighting for over 2 decades to stay in a union. This is the only unionized restaurant right now. And workers, along with allies and residents in Chinatown, are fighting to keep this restaurant open. Or we see places like Museum of Chinese in America who've lost their radical roots, and community members are pressuring them to reject the $35 million that they are going to be receiving from the city in return for their silence on a new jail that will be built in Chinatown. This kind of community-led mapping builds co-authorship and collective ownership, and is so important because it centers people's stories and memories and experiences. They are the ones with the knowledge base. They have the solutions. They are the ones experiencing those issues firsthand around tenant harassment, labor exploitation, institutional racism, etc. So they are the ones that are going to have those solutions to these societal problems and issues that they're facing in their community. What is the relationship between asset mapping and placekeeping? Asset mapping, as we know, is not automatically social justice oriented or even progressive minded. Even within community asset mapping, those processes often don't center the communities who are directly impacted, and they're certainly not the folks who are leading that process. So when we look at rezoning, for instance, which is an issue that Chinatown Art Brigade and in my own work is really important to fight against, with rezoning, what we call upzoning is a way for the city to work with developers to help them change a community's zoning laws so that it can build up, basically build high-rise condos or other kinds of businesses that are high-end that aren't necessarily for the community that live in the neighborhood now, and is often a force of gentrification, right? These luxury developments, these places that they want to build, and in order to do that, they need the state to sanction this gentrification through rezoning. And they state that they do a community asset mapping kind of process, right? So the city has to do what's called a ULURP process. And this kind of community input, they say, is really, so the city has to do this kind of asset mapping or So the city has to do this kind of community asset mapping, right? Collecting community input on a new development. This is called URLRP. Well, we all know, in the community, we all know it's a dog and pony show. Supposedly, developer, the city has to do what is called a URLRP process, which is basically collecting the community's input on a new development. It's a form of community asset mapping, you could say. Well, we all know it's a dog and pony show. Supposedly, developers seek out input from the community. But we also know it's a very selective group of people that they solicit input from. So you have a lot of businesses and individuals and even nonprofit agencies that stand to gain from this kind of development, this luxury development. And oftentimes, it's all sort of planned out already. And the input of everyday working people in that neighborhood is really not, it's not really going to change the process itself. So I guess what I'm saying is that with any community-oriented mapping project and oral history project, this has to be really considered. What does it mean to really center people's stories and experiences? So for instance, in the work with Chinatown Art Brigade, or my own project, Displaced in Sunset Park, which is about the neighborhood I grew up in Brooklyn's Chinatown, and the gentrification that's happening there. So in that work, we really emphasize the community voices, particularly people who are fighting back against displacement. And also we need to emphasize that in the work itself when we're doing this kind of mapping. What are our goals? What are our purpose? Why are we collecting people's stories? We want to do it so that there's a very, very clear idea that this is about placekeeping. It's about preserving people's stories, right? But it's also about making sure that we highlight the placekeeping and resilience of folks. Engaging folks in the process alone is short-sighted. We need to be able to articulate the goals and purpose of the project. And, you know, in general, people want to participate in something that they have a sense of ownership in, and that they know will directly impact and they will directly benefit, right, from telling their stories. They will benefit, they themselves will benefit, their community will benefit, the people they know, their neighbors will benefit. Community members are sophisticated, and they know when someone is trying to come in and just extract them for a story, for a poverty story, or that they're just another number on a data sheet, right? And so we work really closely with tenants in CTU, in Chinatown Tenants Union, and other stakeholders. In this way, it's, again, the mapping work is part of the larger organizing work, part of the larger campaign against gentrification and displacement. Also throughout the project, as I was mentioning in our Housing for the People mapping project, our evening projections, and even our Here to Stay augmented reality project, a lot of folks within CTU, tenant members, wanted to share their housing core experiences with others who are facing similar challenges. And so particularly monolingual speaking Chinese residents wanted to create these how-to videos, right, for people who don't know what to expect when they're facing possible eviction or landlord harassment. And so these videos were one concrete way to address those needs. This, to me, by design, is placekeeping. As we describe it in our work in Chinatown Art Brigade, we see it as maintaining the fabric of a community, not just preserving the buildings or landmarks, but the people who live in the community. In this case, it's Chinatown, right? Chinatown, the place that we all treasure, but the most treasured aspect in our work and in the placekeeping work is the people who live and work in Chinatown. Preserving the cultural memories and oral histories is not enough, right? Cultural organizing for placekeeping is about actively engaging folks to help them maintain their way of life and not to be evicted from their homes or displaced, right? Our work actively has to make sure that it's aiding and helping in that larger fight for long-term residents, for people who made the community what it is, to be able to stay in their homes. Placekeeping cannot just be another word in the social justice vocabulary box that we pull out to show we're down with the cause. But as cultural workers and artists, it's about truly engaging and working with community members who are most directly impacted by displacement and to take their lead. Maybe that cultural event you wanted to organize in that community garden was not what the community needed at that moment, and it's okay. We as artists come in with ideas and assumptions about what a community needs, but it's through the process of working collectively together that we figure out that sometimes those ideas have to go out the window completely.